Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. Some bonds are a mirror. You look at the other person and you see yourself. Same eyes, same smile, same blood. But what happens when that mirror cracks? When the reflection starts to look like a stranger, a darker, more dangerous version of yourself? This is a story about two brothers, identical twins born on the same day in the same hospital, but destined for two completely different worlds. Their names were Ethan and Andre. Ethan was the golden boy, smart, driven, with a smile that could talk a cop out of a ticket. He was the one who was going to make it out. He had a scholarship to the State University, a pretty girlfriend, and a future so bright it was almost blinding. Andre was the shadow. He had the same face as his brother, the same quick mind. But his path had been different. He had been seduced by the streets, by the easy money and the false promise of respect that came from a gun. He was a hustler, a small-time crew leader, a man who saw the world not as a place of opportunity, but as a war zone. Their mother, a tired and devout woman named Maria, prayed for them both. She was proud of Ethan, terrified for Andre. She saw the two halves of her own heart walking two different and diverging paths. The brothers loved each other in their own complicated way. It was a bond forged in the crucible of a shared childhood, in a house that was always a little too cold, a little too empty. They had been each other's only ally for so long. But as they got older, the distance between their two worlds grew. Ethan would come home from college on the weekends, his car filled with laundry and textbooks, and Andre would be on the corner, his pockets filled with cash, his eyes hard and watchful. They would sit on the porch of their mother's house, the silence between them a heavy and unspoken judgment. Ethan didn't approve of Andre's life, and Andre was jealous of Ethan's, a quiet and corrosive jealousy that he kept hidden behind a mask of a tough guy indifference. The trouble started, as it always does, over money. Andre's crew had been hitting a series of local businesses, small-time robberies to keep the cash flowing, but they were getting sloppy, reckless. And Andre, with his sharp mind, knew they needed a bigger score, a score that would set them up for a while, allow them to get off the streets and let the heat die down. He had a target in mind, a jewelry store downtown owned by a man who was known to be soft. It was supposed to be a clean, simple in and out. But the plan had a complication. The store was right across the street from the restaurant where Ethan's girlfriend, Sarah, worked as a waitress. And Ethan would often be there on a Friday night, waiting to walk her home. Andre knew the risk, but the payday was too big to ignore. He told himself it would be fine. They would be in and out before Ethan even knew what was happening. He was a master at the art of self-deception, at justifying the unjustifiable. The night of the robbery, the city was slick with a cold autumn rain. Andre and his two-man crew rolled up in a stolen car. He looked across the street at the restaurant and he saw him, Ethan, sitting in a window booth laughing with Sarah. A perfect picture of a life that was not his. For a moment he hesitated. The ghost of his brother's love, of their shared past, whispered in his ear, "Don't do this." But the hunger for the money, for the respect, for a life that was as bright as his brother's, was a louder voice. He pulled the ski mask over his face, the cheap fabric smelling of dust in a cold and final resolve. He was choosing the streets over his brother. He was choosing the darkness over the light. And in that one and fateful decision, he was about to set in motion a chain of events that would not just destroy his own life, but would also, in the end, destroy the one person he had ever truly loved, his own and only brother. The robbery was a clumsy and brutal affair. Andre and his crew went in hard, shattering the glass display cases, their voices a harsh and desperate bark. The owner, an old and terrified man, just put his hands up, his body trembling. They were in and out in less than a minute. their bags filled with a glittering and ultimately worthless collection of jewels and watches. But as they were running out the door, the world went into slow motion. Ethan from across the street had seen it. He had seen the masked men, the chaos, and in a moment of pure and foolish courage, he had run out of the restaurant, his cell phone in his hand, dialing 911. He was standing on the sidewalk, a perfect witness, as the three men burst out of the jewelry store. And in that one split second, as Andre was running to the getaway car, his mask slipped. Just for a moment. But it was enough. In the harsh and unforgiving glare of the streetlights, their eyes met, brother to brother. And in that one single and devastating moment of recognition, the two worlds collided. Ethan saw not just a robber. He saw his brother. And Andre saw not just a witness. He saw his own and final judgment. Andre got in the car and they sped off into the night. The crew was hyped, high on adrenaline and the thrill of the score. But Andre was silent, his mind a roaring chaos. He had been seen by the one person in the world who could and would identify him, his own brother. Ethan stood on that sidewalk, frozen, the 911 operator, a frantic and distant voice in his ear. He had seen his brother's face, the face that was his own, and he knew with a sickening certainty that his life and his brother's had just been irrevocably and tragically shattered. The police were on the scene in minutes. Ethan, his voice a choked whisper, told them what he had seen. 3 men, a robbery. He gave them a description of the getaway car. But when they asked him if he could identify any of the men, he hesitated. The lie came to his lips, a bitter and protective reflex. No, he said. They all had masks on. I didn't see their faces. It was the first lie, the first betrayal, not of his brother, but of himself, of the man he thought he was, the man who believed in the simple and clean logic of the law. He went home that night, the weight of his secret a physical thing. He looked at his own face in the mirror and he saw his brother's, the face of a thief, a violent criminal, and he was now a liar, an accomplice after the fact. The line between their two worlds, which had once been so clear, was now a blurry and dangerous mess. He had to make a choice between the brother he loved and the law he had sworn to uphold. It was a choice that was going to tear his soul in two, and he knew deep down that no matter which way he chose, a part of him was going to die. The police investigation moved fast. They found the getaway car abandoned and wiped clean. But the old man from the jewelry store, his memory jogged by the trauma, remembered a name he had heard one of the robbers shout, Andre. The name was a lightning rod. The police pulled Andre's file. They saw his priors, his known associates, and they saw the one and most damning piece of information. He had an identical twin brother, Ethan, the star witness who had claimed he hadn't seen a thing. The detectives brought Ethan back in for questioning. The friendly, sympathetic cops from the night of the robbery were gone. In their place were 2 hard-nosed and skeptical detectives. They laid out the evidence, the name, the connection. You want to tell us again what you saw that night, son? One of them asked, his voice a low and dangerous purr. Ethan was trapped. The lie he had told to protect his brother was now a noose around his own neck. He stuck to his story. I told you. They were wearing masks. I didn't see anything. The detectives just looked at him, their eyes full of a weary and disappointed pity. You know, obstruction of justice is a serious crime, kid, the other one said. You're protecting your brother. We get that. But you're about to throw your own life away for a man who is already gone. Is that what you want? Ethan walked out of that precinct a changed man. He was no longer just a witness. He was a suspect, a potential accomplice. The world he had built for himself, the world of scholarships and a bright future, was starting to crumble. He went to see his brother. He found him in his small and grimy apartment, surrounded by the spoils of the robbery. Andre was on the couch, counting money, a smug and defiant look on his face. "They came to see me, Andre," Ethan said, his voice a low and shaking rage. "They know it was you, and they think I'm involved." Andre just shrugged. "So what? They can't prove nothing. As long as you keep your mouth shut, we're good." Ethan stared at his brother, at the man who looked just like him, and he saw a stranger, a cold, selfish, and remorseless stranger. "I could go to jail, Andre," he yelled. "I could lose everything. My scholarship, my future, for you, for this." He kicked over a bag of jewelry, the cheap gold and glass scattering across the floor. "You think I care about your future?" Andre sneered, his own long-buried resentment finally coming to the surface. "You think I like watching you live your perfect life while I'm out here hustling just to survive? You're my brother. You're supposed to have my back. That's the code." And in that one ugly and brutal moment, Ethan finally saw the truth. His brother wasn't just a victim of the streets. He was a willing participant, a man who had chosen the darkness and who was now trying to drag him down into it with him. He walked out of that apartment, the bond between them, the one that had been forged in a shared childhood, shattered into a million pieces. He was alone now, caught between a brother who would see him go down to save himself and a legal system that was ready to bury them both. He had to make a choice, and he knew with a sickening certainty that there was no right answer, just two different kinds of wrong. The pressure on Ethan was immense. The police were leaning on him hard. They subpoenaed his phone records, his bank statements, looking for any connection to his brother's criminal world. His girlfriend, Sarah, was questioned. His professors at the university were questioned. His life, his perfect, carefully constructed life, was being dismantled piece by piece. He was living a lie, and the lie was eating him alive. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the face of his brother and by the choice he knew he had to make. He went to his mother, Maria. He sat in her small and quiet living room, the air thick with the smell of old prayers and a quiet and constant grief. He confessed everything to her, the robbery, the lie, the impossible choice he was facing. She just sat there, her face a mask of a profound and weary sadness. She had been living this nightmare for years, watching her two sons, her two hearts, be pulled apart by two different worlds. "He is your brother, Ethan," she said, her voice a low and trembling whisper. "He is your blood, but he has chosen his path. You cannot let him drag you down with him. You have to save yourself." It was the permission he had been looking for, the permission to choose himself over his brother. But it was a permission that came with a heavy and devastating weight. The next day, he went to the district attorney's office. He had his own lawyer now, and he made a deal. He would tell them the truth. He would testify against his own brother in exchange for full immunity and a chance to get his life back. The decision was a cold and pragmatic one, a calculation of his own survival. But it felt like a betrayal of the highest order. He was breaking the one and only code that had ever mattered to him, the code of blood. They arrested Andre that same day. He was at a bar celebrating his score when the police swarmed in. He didn't fight. He just smiled, a cold and knowing smile. He knew who had given him up. There was only one person who could have. As they led him away in cuffs, he saw his brother Ethan standing across the street watching, his face a mask of a pained and guilty relief. Their eyes met. And in that one final look, the bond between them was severed, completely and irrevocably. They were no longer brothers. They were just strangers. Strangers on opposite sides of a war they had both, in their own ways, lost. The trial of Andre was a quiet and tragic affair. It was a story of two brothers, two halves of the same soul, pitted against each other in a cold and sterile courtroom. Ethan took the stand. He looked at his brother, at the man who wore his own face, and he told the truth. His voice was a low and steady monotone. He laid out the events of that night, the robbery, the slip of the mask, the moment of recognition. He was a masterful witness, calm, credible, and utterly devastating. Andre just sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of indifference. He didn't show any emotion. He just watched. He was watching his own brother, his own blood bury him. The jury found him guilty in less than an hour. The judge sentenced him to 20 years. As they led him away, he looked at Ethan one last time, and he just smiled. A cold and final and terrifying smile. A smile that said, "This is not over." Ethan got his life back. The charges against him were dropped. His name was cleared. He went back to college, back to his life. But he was a changed man. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the face of his brother, by the choice he had made. His relationship with his girlfriend, Sarah, fell apart. She couldn't look at him the same way. She saw the shadow of his brother, of his betrayal, in his eyes. His friends kept their distance. He was the man who had sent his own brother to prison. He was a hero in the eyes of the law. But in the eyes of the world he came from, he was a snitch, a traitor. He had made a choice. He had chosen himself. But he was beginning to realize that the price of that choice was a lifetime of a quiet and profound loneliness. He had saved his future, but he had lost his past. And he was a man adrift, caught in the cold and empty space between two worlds, belonging to neither. And in his cell 100 miles away, Andre waited. He was a man who had nothing left but time, and a single and all-consuming purpose: revenge. He had been betrayed by his own blood, and he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure that his brother, his other half, paid the price. The war was not over. It had just gone cold, and it was a cold that was going to last a lifetime. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.